Thanks for joining us this morning. America is this morning a country under siege. The race riots following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis spreading city to city, scenes of destruction, violence and looting as a cauldron of anger spills over onto the streets. And now the Black Lives Matter movement is spreading, thousands marching in London and even a protest planned for this Wednesday here in Australia. To discuss, I'm joined by Northern Territory Senator Malarndirri McCarthy and the Daily Telegraph State Political Editor Anna Caldwell. Good morning to both of you. Malarndirri, to you first, because the tension has been simmering in the US for some time and it's almost like it just needed a trigger, and the death of George Floyd was that. Why do you think is there so much anger?
Well, it's built up over generations, no doubt, Ali, but let's look at the more recent issue in terms of COVID-19. And, you know, over 100,000 US citizens have died in that country. And Black Lives Matter is obviously looking at just the breakdown as well of the impact on the minority communities across the US, the unemployment rate around, 40 million. Clearly, these have had devastating impacts. And, of course, the tragic death of George Floyd, and we know that that's being felt even here in Australia as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people look at the treatment of black Americans. And we've seen those same protests here in Australia. We only have to refer to Palm Island in Queensland. We just had here in the Northern Territory last year our own tragic death of Kumanjayi Walker. So we know that these are feelings that are very raw, very real, and they're very much from the grassroots. Which is why we will be seeing these protests in Australia on Wednesday. And Anna, I mean, the US, it's facing two of its greatest threats of our lifetime. You've got the race riots and, as Malarndirri is just saying, a pandemic that has killed 100,000 people. We've seen no social distancing at any of these riots. But in such times, you need great leadership. Have we seen that from Donald Trump?
Look, there is certainly a split over Trump's response on this issue, including within his own team. I read a story this morning out of the US that his own advisors are really split over the idea of whether he needs to do more, including the idea of making some sort of statement of unity, perhaps an Oval Office address to try and bring the country together. The issue is Trump's natural style of leadership leans towards more the idea of, being the tough guy on law and order. So we've seen many of his tweets in a way, take that really tough stance, which I think there is a fear that that is then stoking the violence and encouraging it. Tweets such as when the looting starts, the shooting starts. I mean, they've concerned a lot of people. We've seen over the course of history, JFK had to deal with similar types of riots and took a slightly different approach. Statements of unity. I think potentially it's very difficult to see a way out of this. The reality is it's against a backdrop of a job loss of 40 million people, and there are those deep-seated, long-term racial anxieties that we are seeing playing out. So you're right, it does need a very strong leader to take the country through this time.
Yeah, and I don't think, sadly, we've seen any type of strong leadership from Donald Trump throughout this. Can I just say I've never been so happy to live in Australia, and as we know this morning, much of our country is back in business. We've got pubs, beauty salons, cinemas, gyms and more, all beginning the long journey back to some kind of normality. And Malarndirri, the top end, well, it's been leading the way on all of this. Is the next stage to fully open our borders and to allow interstate travel?
Look, we're certainly very thankful here, Ali, with the way the Northern Territory government and the Aboriginal leadership as well with the land councils have handled the crises here. But I have to just remind our fellow Australians that there are still hundreds of thousands of Australian citizens in the Biosecurity Zone. And the Biosecurity Zone is in the far north Queensland area, in the Cape York area, also in South Australia, in the APY lands, and over in WA in the Kimberleys. And right across here in the Northern Territory, there are still close to 100,000 people who can't move around at the moment. And those laws will come down in the Northern Territory this Friday, which will enable people here to experience those things that you've just talked about. But I think they'll still be in place in the other states until around the 18th of June. So we've still got our own people movement intra to deal with first before, I think, we look more broadly, because those people need to have a voice in saying, should those borders be opened?
Anna, do you have any concerns with us sort of, moving at the pace we are?
No, I think we're in a really good position at the moment. I think we've seen, even with the restrictions that have already been lifted, we haven't seen a dramatic uptick in cases. And I know from a New South Wales perspective, that's giving Premier Gladys Berejiklian a lot of hope to continue to move at the pace that we are. I think we should certainly be having one eye on opening those borders up. Partly that's selfish. I would love to go to Queensland to visit my family, but on a bigger scale, the issue here is for tourism operators. I mean, those guys have been so heavily hit by this virus. They need all they can in terms of business support. So I think that should be, the next thing that we're looking to. And it'll take about 2 weeks to see the impact of these restrictions lifting on the virus caseload. Hopefully we have the similar strong results that we've had in the past.
Now, a concerning insight this morning into how Australians who dipped into their super savings are spending the money. So new data shows only 36% has gone on essentials and debt repayments. The majority has been spent, or it's been wasted, you could say, on gambling and alcohol. Malarndirri, I mean, the concerns initially raised about allowing people to unlock their super cash early, unfortunately, I think you can say now being realised.
Well, can I say from the top end's perspective here, Ali, that a lot of First Nations people here have actually accessed that funding, and for the first time I can say, more anecdotally, without statistics, that there has been a far greater lift in the products that they've bought, the ability to have purchase power, and I think that's been a real positive. Whether it should come from super is probably another question, but what it does show is that when people do have cash, when they do have access to be able to spend to look after their families, their rate of living is actually much better. And let's just keep in mind, Ali, can I just say, with closing the gap and the fact of short life expectancy, certainly for First Nations people, the superannuation is sometimes completely out of reach. So for many, they've actually really benefited, and not on gambling, because it's still not open up here.
But Anna, I mean, we're hearing that most people are spending it on booze and gambling. I mean, in my mind, that's a waste.
Oh, yeah, it is a waste, and it's incredibly concerning, I think. I think that's an insight into the depth of the social issues that we're going to have come out of this virus that we haven't actually seen that much evidence of yet. I mean, there are deep concerns about a huge uptick in drinking, in gambling, and if people are using their super on those activities, it's going to hurt all of us later, because, that money is designed as a nest egg. And we can't see a situation in 10, 20 years' time when people have no nest eggs. I think it's very concerning.
I tell you what, I wish I had more exciting and better news for us to talk about this morning. It was all a bit dark, all a bit grim for this Monday, but thanks for joining us. It was heavy.
Thank you.
All right, well, still to come.